Have you ever watched a man stand before his family in a restaurant filled with his most important colleagues and use his own daughter's 31st birthday dinner to announce her brother's promotion? I have. Because that man was my father, Brian Cole, the founder of Cole Capital, one of the biggest venture capital firms in Austin. And that daughter, the one he looked straight through as he raised his glass? That was me. It started with a toast that wasn't for me. He spoke for 10 minutes about Caleb's new role as vice president, about market disruption and quarterly growth. My mother, Lisa, beamed at my brother. Caleb just smirked, soaking it all in. Not one person wished me a happy birthday. When the applause died down, my father finally turned his gaze on me. His eyes were cold. He said my nonprofit, the Urban Roots Initiative, was a cute little hobby. A waste of a good education. He called it a vanity project for a girl who couldn't handle the real world. I just sat there, my hand in my pocket, gripping a small, smooth river stone. A gift from my grandmother. It was the only thing that kept me anchored as the tide of his cruelty rose around me. The entire table was silent, watching. I could feel their pity, their discomfort, their morbid curiosity. And then he delivered the final blow. He looked directly at me, his voice calm, matter-of-fact. "You know, Avery," he said, loud enough for everyone to hear, "sometimes I wish you had never been born." Not a single person spoke up. My mother stared at her plate, suddenly fascinated by her untouched sea base. Caleb took a slow, deliberate sip of his wine. In that moment, something inside me didn't break. It solidified. It turned to ice. I didn't cry. I didn't make a scene. I just squeezed that stone in my pocket, stood up and walked out. They thought I was running away in shame. They had no idea I was walking toward the one night that would shatter their world in front of everyone they respected. If you've ever been made to feel small by the people who should have built you up, you know this story. Stick with me because this is just the beginning. I walked out of that restaurant not with tears, but with a terrifying kind of clarity. The city lights of Austin blurred past my car window, but all I could see was the path forward. I didn't go to a friend's house. I didn't call anyone. I went back to my small apartment, sat on the floor in the dark and opened my laptop. And there was an email that had arrived just an hour before dinner. The subject line read, "Congratulations finalist, Lone Star Humanitarian Prize." My heart didn't leap. It just settled. I scrolled down, my eyes scanning for one thing. And I found it. Primary sponsor, Cole Capital. The plan formed instantly. It wasn't about revenge. It was about truth. The next morning, I walked into my bank and liquidated my entire life savings. $52,000. Every penny I had scraped together over 10 years of living on a nonprofit salary. By noon, I had signed a lease on a small, anonymous apartment across town. I packed my life into 12 cardboard boxes, leaving behind only the ghosts of a family I no longer recognized. This wasn't a sudden decision. It was the culmination of years of quiet work. I remembered sketching the first plans for the Urban Roots Initiative on a cocktail napkin 6 years ago. I remembered the endless nights writing grant proposals that were rejected one after another. I remembered the condescending lectures from my father about getting a real job. But I also remembered the first community garden we built, turning a trash-filled lot into a green oasis. I remembered the faces of the kids who had never seen a fresh vegetable grow from the ground. I remembered the 74 families we now helped feed every single week. I had spent years grinding in the shadows, building something real while my family dismissed me. They thought I was a failure, a hobbyist. They had no idea I was a founder. They had no idea I was a finalist. And they had no idea that their sponsorship of that award gala was about to become the most catastrophic investment they had ever made. I was disappearing, yes. But I wasn't running away. I was preparing for my debut. The family's reaction wasn't concern. It was indignant panic. The first calls were from my mother, Lisa. Voicemails filled with a kind of wounded manipulation. "Avery, what are you doing? You're embarrassing us." And then, "Your father is just disappointed because he loves you." Love. That word sounded so hollow, so foreign. I let her calls go to voicemail for 2 days. When I finally answered, I kept my voice perfectly level. "I need some space, Mom." Before she could launch into another guilt-ridden monologue, I said, "I have to go," and hung up. The silence that followed felt like a victory. But the real escalation came from Caleb. He called that afternoon. There was no greeting. "What the hell are you doing? You made a scene." Dad's contacts were there. He wasn't worried about me. He was worried about the brand. "I'm fine, Caleb," I said, the words tasting like ash. "I don't care if you're fine," he snapped. "I need you. I have to put together a proposal for Cole Capital's new community outreach program, and I need you to write the section on inner-city engagement. You know, all that charity stuff." I almost laughed. It was so perfectly them. So transactional. I wasn't a sister who had been publicly humiliated. I was an unpaid consultant. A resource to be tapped. I had spent years being their ghostwriter, their token compassionate voice, making them look good while they looked right through me. No, I said. The word was so simple, yet it felt like I was moving a mountain. There was a pause on the other end. What do you mean, no? I mean, I'm not writing your proposal. I'm not doing any more free work for Cole Capital. You're being childish, Avery. Dad said what he said to motivate you. Motivate me? He wished I was never born, Caleb. And you just sat there and smirked. You're going to regret this, he said, his voice laced with threat. No, I replied, feeling a new kind of strength solidify in my chest. I'm just getting started. I hung up. That call was the final gift they gave me. It severed the last thread of obligation. They didn't miss me. They missed what I did for them. And it cemented my resolve. The plan was no longer just an idea. It was a promise I was making to myself. I cut off all contact. My phone went silent. My world shrank to my new apartment, my work, and my plan. A week later, I met with my mentor, Dr. Laura Reed, the executive director of the Lone Star Trust. She was the first person who ever saw the Urban Roots Initiative as more than a hobby. Laura didn't hug me when I walked in. She just studied my face. You look different, she said. Clearer. I told her everything. The dinner. The disappearance. The plan. She listened without interruption, her expression unreadable. When I finished, she slid a glossy brochure across her desk. It was for the awards gala. This isn't just some local charity prize, Avery, she said, her voice firm. The grant attached is $3.5 million. It's a game changer. $3.5 million. The number hung in the air so vast it felt unreal. My entire operating budget for the last 6 years was less than a tenth of that. The people in that room, Laura continued, they don't just write checks. They build empires. They change city policy. This award puts you at their table. Then she turned her laptop toward me, displaying a PDF. This is the preliminary seating chart for the gala. My breath caught in my throat. There was Table 1. Front and center, no more than 20 feet from the stage. Reserved for Cole Capital. And the names listed, Brian Cole, Lisa Cole, Caleb Cole. They wouldn't just be in the room. They would have a front row seat to their own public reckoning. The final fuse was lit 3 days later. I was grabbing coffee when I saw it on a newsstand. The Austin Business Journal. The cover story was a feature on the Lone Star Humanitarian Prize finalists. And there, on the right-hand side of the page, was my picture, smiling in one of our community gardens. The headline read, Avery Cole, Cultivating Hope in Austin's Food Deserts. The article mentioned my work, the impact, the years of struggle. And then the final paragraph. Ms. Cole is also the daughter of famed venture capitalist Brian Cole, founder of the gala's primary sponsor, Cole Capital. I knew with absolute certainty they would see it. Their attendance was no longer just a routine corporate obligation. It would be a conscious choice. They would walk into that ballroom knowing I was a finalist, and their complete ignorance of my life's work would be laid bare for all to see. The night of the gala, I stood in the wings of the stage at the Austin Innovation Center, a place I had only ever read about. I wasn't nervous. I felt a profound sense of calm, like the eye of a storm I had created myself. Dressed in a simple, elegant navy dress, I watched them enter. My father, Brian, moved through the crowd like a king in his court, shaking hands, his laugh booming across the marble floors. Caleb was right behind him, a carbon copy in a tailored suit. My mother, Lisa, drifted in their wake, a beautiful, silent accessory. They greeted Austin's elite, mayors, tech CEOs, philanthropists, completely and utterly oblivious. They took their seats at Table 1, the best in the house, a table bought with the sponsorship money that would fund my future. At 8:15, the lights dimmed. The host walked on stage and began the awards presentation. I watched my father check his watch. I saw Caleb scrolling through his phone under the table. This was a chore to them. And then the host said my name. Our next finalist has spent 6 years transforming forgotten urban spaces into sources of life and nutrition. Please watch this tribute to the Urban Roots Initiative. The massive screens on either side of the stage lit up. A professionally produced video began to play. Images of our gardens, testimonials from families, data showing the real, measurable impact of my work. And then the camera director, following the script I knew they'd been given, did something masterful. They cut to a live feed of Table 1. I watched on the monitor backstage as my father's smile froze. I saw Caleb look up from his phone, confusion turning to disbelief. I saw my mother's hand fly to her mouth. The video ended with a shot of me laughing with a group of kids with the words, Avery Cole, founder, superimposed below. The room was already starting to buzz with whispers. Then the host's voice rang out. Please welcome Avery Cole. I stepped into the spotlight. The applause was deafening. 500 people rose to their feet. I walked to the podium, my steps even and sure, and for the first time all night I locked eyes with my father. The look on his face wasn't anger. It was horror. It was the look of a man watching a ghost take the stage at his own party. Backstage was a blur of congratulations. Influential people whose names I'd only seen in headlines were shaking my hand, slipping me their business cards, talking about partnerships and expansion. For the first time I wasn't Brian Cole's daughter. I was Avery Cole, founder of the Urban Roots Initiative. Through the crowd I saw my father marching toward me, his face a mask of thunder. He grabbed my elbow. We need to talk. Now. His voice was a low growl. I gently removed his hand. There's nothing to talk about, I said, my voice calm and steady. You humiliated this family, he hissed. No, I said, meeting his gaze without flinching. I told the truth about my work. If that embarrasses you, that is your burden, not mine. He started to argue, but I held up a hand. The only conversation I am willing to have with you begins with a public apology to me, in front of the same people who were at my birthday dinner. Until then we are done. He stared at me, speechless for the first time in his life, then turned and stormed away. Just as he left, Caleb appeared, his usual smirk replaced by a pale, uncertain look. Avery. I'm sorry, he mumbled. I looked at him, not with anger but with a kind of detached pity. Are you Caleb? Or are you just sorry you got caught? I wasn't going to let him off that easy. I used a technique my therapist called the mirror. Tell me what happened that night, I said quietly. From my perspective. Tell me what you did when your father called my life's work a hobby. He stammered. I didn't say anything. Exactly, I said. And what did you do when he wished I was never born? His eyes darted away. You smirked. The word hung in the air between us, heavy and ugly. For the first time the crack in his perfect facade showed. The fallout was swift. A week later I learned Cole Capital had lost a $12 million investment deal. The investor cited concerns about the company's internal culture. My life, however, was just beginning. With the $3.5 million grant, the Urban Roots Initiative was fully funded. I was free. My worth was no longer a reflection of my father's approval. It was rooted in the soil of the gardens I had built, defined by my own two hands.